Cupping is the way that the coffee industry evaluates coffees. It happens at origin after the coffee is harvested. It happens from a broker's standpoint. It happens for the roaster. It happens for the baristas to know what coffees they're using and to be able to talk to customers about them. We're hoping that customers really embrace it as a way of understanding coffee and knowing exactly what they're tasting. So the first thing is we have a variety of coffees here. We have a Sumatra, an Indonesian coffee. We have this Guatemala coffee from Finca Agua Tibia. It's called Palo Alto Azul. And we have this Ethiopian coffee. It's a Yirgacheffe from Hayakov. And I've also put the green samples here. Cupping involves a lot of the senses. I'm using my site right now. I can look at the different roasts and see how dark the roast is compared to the green beans. I can crack them open and see how the roast went. We're going to involve essentially all of our senses. Things should have certain scents, like the green beans should smell a certain way if it's a really good coffee. Shouldn't have any really offensive smell. This one smells fantastic. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 2 tablespoon scoop and I'm going to measure each one of these into this 7-ounce cup. It's about 2 heaping tablespoons per 7-ounce cup, whole bean. Now begins the grinding process. It's really important that we don't mix any flavors or coffee while doing this, so I'm actually going to take a few grounds for each one and just sort of purge the grinder to make sure that it's been clean and that if there's any flavor of coffee in there, it's the same coffee that I'm going to be grinding. So the grind that I used is a 6.5 on a Ditting. This wouldn't really mean necessarily anything to you even if you were using the exact same grinder, because it could be calibrated differently. And even some of our Dittings are not always perfectly calibrated. The way this should feel is it should be thicker than, say, table sugar, but maybe a little bit finer than like a raw sugar. If I were to take it in my hand and clump it up, it shouldn't hold too well, but it should maybe keep a little bit of form. It's really important to make the only variable the coffee if that's the kind of cupping that you want to do. So in this case, the only variable is the 3 different coffees. Everything else should be as consistent as possible. At this point, we have ground coffee in cups, and you might think like, okay, let's spring on the water, but this is actually a pretty important part. This is the fragrance or the dry aroma. I actually want to get my nose really up close to the coffee. You'll notice that I'm smelling from each one. The reason that there are 3 cups is that we're using a very small sample size, and I want to make sure that they're fairly consistent from cup to cup on each of the 3 from each one of these 3 coffees. But I also want to see the range of flavors that I can expect to get in a larger brew of it. I'm going to set a timer for 4 minutes. I'm using water that's approximately 30 seconds off a boil, somewhere between 195 and 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Pouring these right up to the top. As you're doing this, you'll notice a considerable amount of blooming. The gases being released from the grounds will actually create quite a bit of expansion right on the top. Over the next 4 minutes, this will create a crust on the top of each cup. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to get up to these cups and smell this wet aroma of the crust. And our 4 minutes are up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to break these crusts. And as I do, I just want to get really close to the cup and breathe in the wet aroma of the break. In between each one that I do, I'm going to clean off the spoon with this water and just make sure that I either wipe it along the side to get the water off, or I could use a towel, just make sure it's dry. As before, I'm doing all 3 just to make sure that the cups are consistent and to see the range of flavors in the cup. So after I've broken the crusts on all of these coffees, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to skim off the product of the blooming. At this point, most of the coffee grounds in the cup have either floated to the top or have sunk to the bottom. I want it to remain that way. I want to skim the top off to get down to just the coffee. There's a considerable amount of really nice lipids here on the top, which would taste amazing in terms of the mouthfeel, but would taste pretty much the same from cup to cup and would sort of actually get in the way of the true essence of the individual coffees. As you can see, I'm still rinsing my spoons in between each cup, even the cups of the same sample. As much as I can keep each cup sort of quarantined, the better off that the sample will serve. After I've skimmed the grounds off of all these cups, I actually might want to wait a little while. While the ideal brewing temperature is between 195 and 205 degrees, the ideal tasting temperature is about 110 degrees. I wouldn't want to burn my palate, burn my tongue, and like lose all ability to even taste. Okay, so it's now time to taste the coffee. What you want to do is just right from the top, take a sample into a nice cupping spoon. A cupping spoon will typically have a pretty shallow base, but not too shallow. You want to be able to get, perhaps half an ounce of liquid into it. And you want to slurp the coffee. And the reason that you slurp the coffee is that you want to spray the coffee to all the areas of your mouth, but you also want to just generally aspirate the coffee. We will cup the coffee for a considerable amount of time. A good coffee should taste just as good, if not better, when it's cooled off to below 110 degrees as it does when it's pretty hot. And that's actually a really good sign of a weak coffee. It's a coffee that might taste good at 150 degrees, but at 100 degrees doesn't really taste like very much at all. Some of the things that I'm looking for when I'm cupping coffee, I particularly want a clean cup of coffee, a cup of coffee that has a nice clarity of flavor. And I'm also looking for a coffee that has a considerable amount of acidity. Acidity is the brightness in coffee. It is the catalyst for all the flavor in coffee. If you didn't have acidity in coffee, it would be tantamount to not having carbonation in soda. One of the really important things about cupping is that you are cross-comparing coffees. Things that might, when you're having a cup of them, just taste like coffee, when you are cupping them, suddenly the difference really stand out. For example, this Sumatra has a really full body. It's really thick and syrupy. The flavors are pretty earthy, like wood. There's a lot of nuts. I get some nice, like sweet chocolate, like a really dark chocolate bar. Whereas this Ethiopia over here is like the opposite. It's really fruity, it's sparkling. It reminds me of a lemon lime soda almost. It's floral, it's sweet in a completely different way than the Sumatra is sweet. When I'm having those by themselves, it might be difficult to notice that, but when you taste them next to each other, the difference really presents itself. One of the great things about cupping that I encourage everybody to do is to involve as many people as you can. Oh, hi, Chris. Oh, hey, Eileen. Good timing, guys. So that you can bring their background and their food experience so that you can hear what they have to say about the coffees and combine that for a more complete experience of the coffee.